Welcome back to the Radical Innovators podcast. I'm your host, Frank Congiu, and for this episode, I sit down with Kathie Patterson, CHRO of Ally Financial. Watch as Kathie shares how her company supports employees' financial literacy, shows up in the moments that matter, maintains human connection in the AI evolution, and overall drives wellness in the face of transformation. So let's dive in with Kathie Patterson. Kathie, welcome to Radical Innovators. So great to have you on the podcast today.
Thank you, Frank. It's wonderful to be here.
It's funny because when I was at NYU, I studied psychology and I had this thought that that's the path I'd pursue. And then I shifted degrees. I went into accounting. Now I don't do either of the two. You pursued it further than me, and then you're in the role of a CHRO now. I'd love to hear, and I'm sure the audience would love to hear in terms of what that has done for you in terms of empowering you to be the best CHRO and leveraging all of the education you have in your current role.
I grew up in the heart of Detroit, very modest family, first generation college grad. I had a mother that pushed me really hard to be independent. And I had a father who had a very pragmatic view about what truly matters in terms of deep, meaningful relationships and good health. And I think that foundation really served me well. I fell into IO through academics, but I started off in engineering, and it became really clear, Frank, that I was not with my people. And I switched over to industrial organizational psychology because it built to some degree in the mathematic component. I originally thought I was going to go off into teaching in industrial organizational psychology because that's usually what you got to do with a psychology degree. You got to pursue that of a doctorate. But I was fortunate early on in my master's program. I had to find a practicum, and as a result of that search, I found a full-time job. And it was from that point, my career sort of took off. I was part of rebuilding HR systems that was really a result of a discrimination law. So you want to talk about sort of like baptism by fire at a very early stage of my career. It taught me that HR, you can't hide behind policies. You need strong judgment. You need to understand the business. You need to have the courage to make the tough calls. And through that journey at that my first place of employment, I met my husband. And when the opportunity came to come over to GMAC, I was 26 weeks pregnant with my third child, which is not the ideal time to sort of jump from one to another. But I learned that, and what I still believe is that timing's never perfect. So you have to make bold moves when the opportunity is right. And so not necessarily when it's convenient. So I've been here for 18 years, which is a little shocking to say out loud. I started at the time it was GMAC, and then they transformed into a digital bank. So it's been quite the journey. So that's a little bit of my background, and hopefully gives you some insights of as we continue this conversation, what has sort of shaped my path.
Yeah, the non-traditional career path. We hear it a lot on here, so it's always great to hear that because I think many of the people who are listening aspire to eventually be in the role that you're in, and the reality is there's a number of different paths to get there, and we've certainly had a varying stories of what that's looked like for leaders on. But you've taken on more responsibility and more recently. So I think about your role and how that's and now includes corporate citizenship. And what does that fundamentally change the way you're looking at the role and the way you're leading the organization?
Well, I've taken on responsibility for our philanthropic ethics, which includes our corporate citizenship outreach and our foundation. And it isn't just organizational logic in terms of how do you bring the structure together. It's personal for me. As I mentioned, being first generation college grad, I have seen sort of firsthand how hard it is to break through the poverty lines without a strong foundation. So when I think about my role leading human resources and that the number of teammates that we have that probably live paycheck to paycheck, financial literacy and management is not something or a discipline that's probably well taught within the school systems. I recognize that it requires access, opportunity, and strong financial foundations. And that's not just what we need to do for our communities, but how we support our own employee base. At Ally, we've rolled out money roots and money skills, all efforts around financial wellness and programs to understand your mindsets around money. But, what are we doing for our internal employees? So really thinking about how we're bringing those services to an education for our internal employees. It's no different than what we're doing within our communities in terms of supporting economic mobility. So it's, I think, given me a lens of how to create more of a holistic employee experience. But, you know, even for those that don't live paycheck to paycheck, there's an enormous amount of pride I think employees have being part of an employer that gives back to their communities. So there's that connection as well in terms of driving the engagement of our employee base, strong sense of pride. So integration has been strong, and it definitely is really thinking about how we're strengthening the employee experience.
Yeah, I mean, you hit on 2 things, right? One, which was where this podcast was born out of, which are what are the roles leading organizations doing to improve the lives of their employees? And then something that I'm very personally passionate about in growing up in a very wealthy town, but, an uneducated family where I'm the first person to ever go to college. And so one of the biggest things that I always found was the school system does not prepare you, and why I was so inspired by partnering with John Hope Bryant years ago around getting financial literacy to be more of an imperative. So it's phenomenal to hear that you're not only helping do this for the community, but also for your own employees. And I think that shows up, right? Because you were recognized and listed as Fortune's 100 best companies to work for in 2024 and 2025. And it's one thing to make the list, it's hard to continue to be on the list. But I'm curious, what are some of the key changes in employee feedback or the talent strategy between those 2 years that helped you, maintain, or improve the ranking? And then also, what are you looking at doing in the coming years to continue to stay on that list?
So I believe, I think at the core, that employees want to have a strong personal and professional connection with their employer. And I believe that to really have a competitive advantage, you're figuring out how to drive that intersection. I believe it starts as an employer of showing up in moments that matter for our employees and understanding the moments that they're vulnerable and how are we providing support to them in those moments. That can range. We went out and we surveyed our employees to get a better sense of like where's the moments in which they're really uncomfortable. And some of it is what you'd expect, right? It's I'm starting a new job, just got promoted. It's the death in the family, so it's something just happened and now I need to navigate. The emotions are really high. I have an employee concerned about raising my hand in terms of how to handle it. So we really step back and try to understand what those moments that matter for our employees are and design a process and a support system that's there that meets them. And, that ranges not just from company like HR services, but it's about benefits too. Like, how are we modernizing our benefits to make sure that we support our employees? And so I do think a large part of our recognition for being one of the best companies to work for has to do with the fact that I think we really work hard to be in tune with our workforce. We also just recently earned a first-time recognition for women and parents, and this matters because it shows inclusion. So it identifies the fact that we are designing for inclusion and also designing for the reality. Being a mom with 3 kids and managing an enormous amount of change, I'll be the first one to tell you that life can be very floppy at times, right? Most people have very full lives. And so, as an organization, you don't want to frame that as an accommodation. We have to design around it. We have to realize that that's the reality. And truthfully, more than likely, that's the type of teammate that we want. I think that is a little bit of the secret sauce competitive advantage. But when I start to think about what we need to do as we continue to move forward, I think a lot has to do with continuing to drive career mobility, having employees make sure that they stick career path to themselves and how they're continuously learning and growing. And I think that will just be an ongoing sort of learning. Right now it's about AI and understanding what that means and educating the workforce. And you're seeing now more days that employers also expect to have not just professional learning, but personal learning, time management, wellness. So really keeping up with that agenda, I think will be at the forefront.
Yeah, and you hit on a few things I wanna just go a step more into. I think about you've launched your purpose, people, and impact report and talked a lot about this people first human capital approach. So I'd love to hear how that's also helping drive the business goals. And then You also, in that last comment, talked about internal mobility, which is a number of the organizations that I'm talking with now. It's such a priority around how do you retain this talent that's like been historically a great fit for the culture, but maybe isn't a fit for where the organization's going from a skilling standpoint. And so, curious, like what you're doing to help encourage some of those organizational transitions and to make sure that these people do stay with Ally.
Hands down, our culture is seen as our competitive differentiator. I mean, all we have is our talent, right? I mean, that's really the core of our organization. That's our intellectual property. That is what's making the difference. And it's not just managing for compliance. It's making sure that, we are leveraging a strategic advantage. And people can vote with their feet nowadays. And it's so easy, especially in the financial industry, to go across the street, really creating a workplace that people want to be a part of. And if they feel like they connect, they feel like they're heard and they can contribute. And at the core, I believe people really want to contribute to something that's meaningful and bigger than themselves. So when we're all in with our employees, I mean, we've worked hard to ensure that we've modernized our benefit. Uh, we've worked hard to make sure that our frontline employees feel like they have a voice. And if you are all in with your employee, your customers feel it. And if your customers feel it, your shareholders. And that's a very simple equation, but man, it's one that I think sometimes it's easy to get backwards. If you were to say, what is that people first human capital? It really is about recognizing that your employees are your biggest competitive advantage. They're human. They live full and sloppy lives. How are you driving sort of greater meaning for them through their work? Um, and helping them continue to grow. We as an organization use like the do it right mantra, which is part of the ethos of who we are. And, when we launched our brand, one thing that we said is like, wow, do it right is that's really aspirational, but you can't do that if your employee value prop doesn't line up to it, right? You can't, you need to have your employees believing that. So they're driving that same value prop to the customer. And so as we talk about that purple people first, I do want to highlight that brand promise and is deeply connected with the way in which we lead internally as well. I'll tell you, the biggest hurdle with mobility is manager mindset. We work really hard. It's the same story, Frank, that people leave managers, they don't leave companies, and you can argue one way or another, but either way, that manager relationship is important. We don't talk about it a lot, but managers are just equally as invested. And that mindset of managers really feeling like when they lose talent to another department, that it's a loss versus this is truly what your role is. And this is the right scorecard for you in terms of how you're developing and growing our leadership pipeline. So that I have to say is probably the biggest hurdle, and continue to drive the fact that managers need to be empathetic. They need to have strong connections. They need to know their employees personally and connect with them on that front. But then when the employee sort of advances or leaves their department, I think it's a breakup that doesn't always feel good in the moment. And so helping managers understand that that's their role, and rewarding managers for developing their talent and moving their talent forward. We're still working on it. We're really happy with our mobility rankings, but there's still opportunities for us to sort of continue to grow our leaders. They can let go and encourage their talent to move on a little faster.
It's a tricky one, right? Because talent hoarding is not new. This is what is historically happened in most organizations. And to your point, people feel stuck and then they leave. And you see the most successful organizations in the world that have thrived at this. I think about the work I did with GE 10 years ago. They were very intentional about their rotational programs and actually measuring and incentivizing managers who did move people around the organization. So they were recognized and rewarded for that. And it's those policies that help drive the right behavior. But your point, that is a hard behavior to shift because if that scorecard is I need to be producing and the team I have around me is helping me produce, it's hard to want to have that person's best interest at heart. I'm sure we've all been on both sides of that equation.
And then when you add that resources are tight or that the learning curve is steep for a role, and geography, that truthfully, sometimes geography plays a part because, we in Detroit, we might have certain functions, same thing within, other markets. It might be predominantly customer service, but that is also probably created a little bit of a hurdle for us that we're working through. But I am proud to say that, the majority of our posting positions go to internal. That we do give preference to internal candidates over external, continue to encourage. We want to be your destination for your career.
How are you equipped as an organization to help really with employees with this? And what are some of the best practices? Are there some great partners? Are you being very intentional about the time, allowing people the time to leverage these resources? Are they rewarded for doing it? Just curious, like if there's any best practices that you would share of which other organizations that are thinking about this can benefit from.
So we rolled out our Ally AI across the enterprise in 2025, and our focus was really about creating and educating our employees around how can they use this tool to become even more productive, using it more as a supplement as opposed to a replacement. And being within the financial industry, I think we have to be very careful around taking unnecessary risks. So we've worked hard in terms of making sure that we have the right governance in place of how AI is being used in specific parts of our business. But so much of our focus has really been educating the workforce of how to use the tools, how to create good prompts. So some of the things that we've done is we've gone into like collections, gone in, pulled sort of the change agents and asked them, tell me how this tool can make your life easier. Tell me how a frontline collector needs this. And so leveraging actual teammates, some of those change agents to really help us think about what the applications are to reduce that sort of scariness. So I would say that that's one. The other is that we are working really hard to democratize our data. So much of making AI fuel that you need to have clean data. And so much of our efforts have really gone into data governance, looking at how we can democratize our data so people can use AI to really speed up their work. And so I wouldn't claim that we have a silver bullet on this particular front, but yes, so much of it is trying to reduce the scare for employees and getting them a little comfortable. I just recently had an interview, and so much of it is, the difference in skill set. You might not need someone of the same rote type work, but you will always need a level of human interaction when it comes to judgment, decision making, programming these agents. And we are human species that strive for connectivity. And so when there's moments that matter where emotions are high and it's complex, people don't want to keep hitting the button for an AI agent, right? They want to talk to a human that can listen, that can be empathetic, and not that an AI agent can't be programmed to be empathetic. But I think there's a high need for human connection in moments of stress or when stakes are high. And so from that standpoint, we do have, I think, a strong do it right view of like there will always be a human in the middle, and recognizing, especially being a digital bank, there's going to be times where our customers are so, they want to move fast and it's efficiency. But then there's going to be other moments where it's like, I want to make sure that you understand what my issue is. I want to make sure that you heard me. I want to know if there's an exception that goes above and beyond what you programmed your computer to do. And I don't necessarily see that changing. Even with the younger generations, I still think that there's, in those moments, a need for judgment and deep connection. So when we start talking about upskilling, really trying to and get our employees to be more agile, embrace technology, be more open to change, seeing around corners. But a lot of it's really sort of trying to drive more life skills into our DNA within our organization and reinforcing it.
As you think about that, what's the one non-negotiable trait you look for when you're hiring senior people, whether that's in the HR organization or just across the business? Because you talked about this idea of data cleanliness and transparency, the value of not leveraging bots and AI and agents and everything, right, and making sure that the human element and touch is still there. As you're thinking about the people you want to bring into the organization from the outside, what is that one non-negotiable trait?
When it comes to early talent or interns, I want to see that they can take feedback. I want to see that they're they're open to feedback, and they have a level of learning agility. I want to know that they're learners. I want to learn that they're adaptable. I want to see that. I don't want interns that are overly fragile for feedback that will help them grow. I don't want knowers within. I want somebody that is willing to inquire and ask questions. To me, that's an important quality that if you have that foundation skill, it's pretty easy to sort of develop and grow your talent from there. When it comes to HR, and it goes back to a little bit of my early learnings, man, grit and determination, but probably more specific, judgment are really important for me. I struggle with probably HR leaders that might hide behind policies. You know, that's their first instinct in a tough situation is to like, run and hide behind it versus saying what's the right thing to do, what's the spirit here. That's important to me. And I don't want HR to be seen as a compliance theater, really about strategic business functioning and thinking deeper about what the impacts are and change management. And so it's it's that judgment and it's also that grit that I look for. Like if I'm in the trenches, I want to know that my team's going to be right there with me.
So, and just I want to maybe wrap on a future focus question for other CHROs. I'm just curious what advice you'd give around elevating HR's role because the work that you're doing is so important, and I think a lot of HR leaders don't have this as a formal role and responsibility. You're seeing more and more like the CHROs of ServiceNow, Moderna take on the integration of AI being adopted in the organization and that being a focus. But this idea of having both human capital and corporate citizenship oversight, are there best practices or even whether it's at organization-wide level or at the individual level where you'd share in some of the great work that you're doing that others can pick up on and scale as well?
I think one of the things that for me is a principle that I continue to just want to apply, especially when you talk about being a purpose driven company, is like how you treat your people during the hard times speaks volumes about the organization and what it says to those that are remaining within the organization or are in. Not too long ago, we had a reduction in force, and I, for me, it is so easy to think about how that could be a moment that could be driven through efficiency by, and I think sadly, you probably have seen it in some cases where people find out after 25 years that their position's being eliminated through an email or, a large employee broadcast. How you handle those moments, I really think speaks volumes about your organization and what for. So for me, really thinking long and hard about those decisions that we're making, those strategic pivots, and how are you mobilizing your team? How are you thinking about motivating them, inspiring them, and supporting them through? And how you handle those tough decisions, I think, speaks volumes. And I think that's where strong HR leadership comes in because they help sort of think through with a level of intentionality.
Yeah. I mean, as an organization, we support obviously a lot of organizations sourcing talent, but on the flip side of it, we work with a lot of organizations that are making those tough decisions and making reductions in forces and helping individuals find new roles. And to your point, I certainly see organizations that handle it incredibly well, and then there's others that handle it very poorly. And so that's one of those, if I go back to your earlier comments, moments that matter where this is something that has such a potential impact, not only on that individual's life, but at the end of the day on your brand as well. And so one of those things just to handle right for many of the right reasons.
I want to offer another challenge that I see probably more so that we as HR professionals need to sort of think about. And it is, man, technology is moving fast. Markets are moving quickly. You see a lot of policy related change. I'm really concerned about transformation fatigue and just the whiplash of how fast things are moving at such a steady, rapid pace for our senior leaders and for our employees. And there's no doubt the most successful companies are going to be the ones that can move fast, they're resilient, and they're adaptable. We're still dealing with people, and you get fired. So making sure that you're really thinking about sort of driving wellness within your workforce, I think is important. But I do worry about sort of just the general transformation fatigue that I think many have been feeling over the last couple of years.
So maybe a quick question to you then is What is your best way to unwind and recharge?
My best way to unwind is truly reading or doing yoga or going to the spa with my girlfriends. So, that, but if I really think about like what calms me, it's probably doing yoga.
We talked a lot about financial literacy. Is there a favorite book that you recommend to people within the organization to help their improve their financial literacy?
Oh, favorite book. Well, we at Ally have a book that we put out and that I would strongly recommend. No, I was going to say The Money Tree, but that's one I used to read to my kids all the time. So The Money Tree is a great one too that I strongly recommend. But I think that one has a much deeper, more childhood memory. But Planet Z is a financial literacy book that we at Ally have put out that I think it's an easy read, but it's a nice way to start embedding some basic sort of skills around how to manage your dollar.
I'm gonna have to pick that up. Admittedly, I have not read it, but The Automatic Millionaire was my pick. When I was young, it was one of those very easily digestible and actionable books. Kathy, thank you so much for joining us on the Radical Innovators podcast. It was great to have you on, and hopefully get to see you at another event at some point soon.
Sounds good. Thank you, Frank. I appreciate the time.